Good evening, everyone. This is a special meeting called by the full board in order to have a public hearing on the bond issuance. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Trustee Brunner?
Here.
Trustee DeMaria?
Here.
Trustee Cogstad? Trustee Minks?
Here.
Trustee Sinensky?
Here.
Trustee Stackman?
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. There are no special reports, and so we have public hearings, and this will begin the public hearing. What I'm going to do is start off with a presentation by the Holocaust Museum. And are you guys ready? No. Okay. Howard, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you can go up to the podium, and then they're working on your projector. I want to assure the audience that people who are also opposed to this will have a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Howard Swibel. I am here as Vice President of the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois, which is the organization founded in 1981, which is building the new Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. We are here to ask you to exercise your judgment. We are not entitled to anything. We are here to ask for your assistance. I'd like to just begin the presentation by showing a very brief, I think it's 8 minutes, CD. Is there a way that we can lower the lights? Do you know where that is? Anybody know?
I think we got them.
The mayor is all power.
No, that's good.
This was prepared in connection with our campaign to raise financial support for the museum.
Is there a microphone? Is this got?
We got no volume.
Is there volume?
Sorry about this.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Joe. Put the microphone by there, too, once it's on. Is there volume?
It's hooked up. volume's all the way up. Mm-mm.
No.
So as not to delay, let me
Yeah,
just
go ahead.
continue, and if we can get it hooked up. Bill Curtis had narrated the story of what happened in the late 1970s when the American Nazi Party requested permission to have a march in Skokie. The village of Skokie, led by Albert Smith, brought together a community-wide effort to try to stop the Nazis. They ultimately were permitted to have a demonstration. But what was striking to the people in Skokie, which included 10,000 Holocaust survivors, was that this could happen in America, because they thought this was the haven, this is a place of freedom and safety. And in fact, there is no place that's totally safe from bigotry and hatred. So they formed an organization called the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois. They purchased a small strip center storefront, 6,000 square feet on Main Street in Skokie. And beginning in the mid-'80s, they've operated a small museum exhibit, which has played host to 10 or 15,000 school children a year from throughout the state of Illinois and from several surrounding states. During this time period, great strides have been made in Holocaust education, notably the opening of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. in 1994, and the development of museums in other cities. New York City has one in Battery Park. Detroit has one in the suburb of Farmington. Houston has one. Los Angeles has one. There's one in St. Petersburg, Florida, and there are other smaller ones as well. There are other ones developed in Europe, in Berlin, in Paris, and London. Illinois is behind the times. The facility we have is outdated. Meanwhile, the organization, the Holocaust Memorial Foundation, was in the forefront of getting the state of Illinois to be the first in the United States in 1990 to require the teaching of a unit of Holocaust instruction in the public schools. That's for every child in Illinois. Yet this is one of those so-called unfunded mandates. The state does not provide any funds to any local school district to carry out that mandate. So many have turned to us and say a field trip to the museum would be an appropriate way to fulfill that mandate. And so we set about to try to develop property. In 2002, we were able to negotiate a landmark agreement with the Cook County Forest Preserve District. And Commissioner Suffredin, I believe, will be here in a little while to speak to you. But he was instrumental in persuading, along with, well, he wasn't yet elected, but he assisted us, and Cal Sutker was instrumental in getting the county board to allow 2 acres of forest preserve land to be used for a parking lot. Later that same year, Governor Ryan awarded $5 million of state money to this project. In June of '03, we acquired the acreage along the Edens Expressway at Gulf Road and entered into a very unusual arrangement with the village of Skokie, where it was a precedent-setting agreement. The village of Skokie actually holds title to this land, and for a variety of reasons, including the fact that this really is a public-private partnership. And just to harken back to the Washington situation, in Washington, it was the U.S. government Park Service land, which is the land on which the Holocaust Museum sits, but all of the money to build it was privately raised. And today, 60% of the Washington Museum's budget is paid for by the U.S. government. We wanted to, as much as we could, replicate that situation in Illinois, to make it clear that this is not an ethnic museum, this is not a Jewish museum, this is not a religious museum, this is a community facility which teaches about hatred and bigotry and the lessons of the Holocaust. After we acquired the land, we continued to assemble a first-class team of experts. We have Stanley Tigerman as our architect, who's a He's now in the twilight of his career at age 72, world-famous architect, books written about him, and he says this is the crowning achievement of his career. The project director who developed the museum in Washington is our special consultant, along with the former director of Israel's Holocaust Museum, who had worked on the New York Museum and is also collaborating for the first time to develop the interior of our museum. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you Sam Harris, who is the president of our organization and who himself is a Holocaust survivor. Sam?
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Sam.
It's my pleasure to be here. Very important evening for the whole state of Illinois. I think Howard did a beautiful job trying to summarize what is so beautifully done by video. I would like to add one more thing, Howard, if you don't mind. You had mentioned that the state of Illinois is the first to have public education for all the students in Illinois. And last year, a group of us went down, including you, and we went to Illinois. We passed another law stating that not only the Holocaust be taught, but other genocides. And again, I believe this is the first state to do that. And I think what is being done here tonight is very historic. I might like to say that it's sort of, well, if I can teach you a Jewish word, the word is beshert. It is meant to be when that we're here tonight. We were standing there, Sufferton was there, but also we were honoring Mr. Sutker, Commissioner Sutker, and Howard and I were there, and your mayor happened to walk by, and we started talking about the museum. And that's how we started off, by being here. It was sort of meant to be that we're here. And I want to thank you for considering all of this. It's a beautiful thing for the country, for, I'd like to say the world, because right now what our museum is all about is education. That's what it's about, is educating our children about bigotry. And if you read the papers, and all of you do, you know right now they're questioning to see if the Holocaust ever existed. Well, let me tell you something. I was there. I'm one of the youngest Holocaust survivors. I was in 2 concentration camps, and I'm devoting my life to make sure that these things do not happen to my grandchildren, to your children, and so on. And I've come to conclusion, as so many of the other survivors have done, is there's only one way to fight all that, and that's not with machine guns, but through education. And that's what you would be funding here, is to educate your children, your grandchildren, and that we make sure that we have a world that will not be in the position it's in. If you think of a better way than doing it through education, let me know, because I will devote my life to that. So again, thank you, Mayor, and I'll see you in the new museum.
I mentioned that we were assembling a world-class team, and among them is our project director, Rick Hirschhout, who has spent 20 years with the Anti-Defamation League in California and then 10 years here in Illinois. And Rick gave up a great career with an organization with 25 offices throughout the country to come to this, in some sense, fledgling organization which is mushrooming. And Rick has a vision he'd like to share with you.
Thank you, Howard. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Mayor, fellow trustees, we appreciate the opportunity to stand and appear before you this evening. One of the many challenges of building and creating this educational experience that will be the underpinning of the new Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center is to treat this institution as an opportunity for young people, certainly to learn about the terrible history, the incremental steps that led to the cataclysm that we know today as the Holocaust, those incremental steps from 1933 to 1945, but to do so in a way that illustrates to them that at so many points along that path that led to that terrible catastrophe, there were choices to be made. There were opportunities for people to stand up, to say no, to hate, to interrupt the evil that was afoot. Sadly and tragically, so many chose to ignore and look aside and look askance at that opportunity, either neglecting the pleas and cries for help of their neighbors and their friends, or perhaps even willfully collaborating. Within that terrible history, however, there were many, many points of light, far fewer than we would have hoped for. But part of our challenge and part of the message that we want to bring to the young people who will experience this museum is to indeed illustrate those points of light, that this will become an institution in which hope reigns supreme. Not in a triumphalist way, not in a way that somehow minimizes or discounts the terrible tragedy of the Holocaust, but that conveys to them that yes, there were those precious few who at that moment of truth, when the knock came on the door from their neighbor, from their friend, from their coworker, oftentimes from the stranger, they answered that call and they saved lives. And the evidence is there. So many of the survivors who constitute the nucleus and the founding and really the lifeblood of this remarkable organization are here because of that kindness, because of that fundamental human impulse to do good. I mention it also because the educational mission of this institution will be designed and is being created as we speak in a post-9/11 world. This will be the first Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center created that we know of, certainly here in the Midwest, in that post-9/11 reality. And so not only do we have an opportunity, but we also have a certain obligation to impart to young people, to our children, to our grandchildren, that while they have seen in their lifetime a world that can be wrecked with terror and hate, at the same time, there can be tremendous good, and there can be opportunities to make a positive difference, and that they are not alone. In this institution, we will give Illinois school children, 2.5 million of them eligible and really required under this mandate that Howard and Sam spoke of, to learn about the Holocaust and to learn about, sadly, the genocides that continue in our world today. Our objective is to give them the tools, to empower them, the tools, the resources, the confidence to become agents of change, and to recognize that the world that they will soon inherit as they mature into adulthood will be one that can be filled with hope and that can be shaped by their own actions. That's the high moral example that we intend to model and hold forth and inspire through the teaching that we will do. Howard mentioned the current facility that we've outgrown, that we outgrew many years ago, but still today 10, 12, 15,000 young people pass through its doors. And if you look at the cumulative aggregate impact of that organization, of our beloved organization in that current site, it is not going too far to say that we have literally transformed a generation of young people, because they come back to us and they talk to us and they remember that moment, that personal connection that literally changed their lives when they heard an individual survivor, many of whom are with us tonight, bleed in front of them, relive their own personal horror in front of them, but always with that exhortation of embracing life, choosing life, and trying to do good in the world. Well, in this new facility, with your assistance that we humbly beseech tonight, we will have an opportunity to reach not just 10 or 12 or 15,000 young people, but 120,000, 150,000, 200, even 250,000 people who will come to this community, who will come to Skokie, who will come to the neighboring communities, spend meaningful time learning and reflecting upon what these lessons of history have to say and can teach us about how our world can be today. It is a very daunting obligation and responsibility that we have all taken on. But we take it on with an eye on today, but in many respects with an eye on 25 years from now, and 50 years from now, and 75 and 100 years from now, when those who bore witness to these atrocities will no longer be with us to tell their story. How will the Holocaust be understood and taught? How will this precious legacy go forward for generations to follow? We are taking on a responsibility for the future. How will we, with this organization, how will all of us be judged? Did we act responsibly? Did we give to our children and our grandchildren a legacy of hope and something that they will cherish and something that they will be able to use as a credo for the way they live their lives? These opportunities don't often present themselves in life. The opportunity to stand proud, to be courageous in our time with an eye on the present, but ever so much with an eye on our own individual legacies. This, ladies and gentlemen, we respectfully submit, is one of those moments, one of those decision points, one of those proverbial forks in the road in our lives, when we have an opportunity to get it right, to stand up, to be courageous, to do something that we can be very, very proud to say we were a part of, to be able to enshrine the leadership of this village in this remarkable new institution that will be a gift to the community at large and really a gift to the nation, because there will not be anything quite like what we will see and what we will do under the roof of this remarkable structure. And so, with apologies for perhaps taking a little too long, We need you. We appreciate your consideration, and we hope you will join with us in this conspiracy of goodness and hope. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we might have the video working. Daniela, you think so?
We'll try.
Is the projector on? I don't know if I don't see the light on the projector. Daniela? I think it's unplugged.
We're getting closer, huh? There.
Is it on?
Yeah.
The light?
No, it wasn't.
No.
Yep, it's warming up, I think. We're doing it with the lights again?
Yeah, we'll, as soon as I make sure it's working. Is that what it is? That might be too much.
Thank you.
We ran to hide, and a ranger came in the forest. My sister told him that we came to fetch some wood for the winter. He came with such a rage to us that we are Jewish. We told him a lie. We must die like the rest of the Jews.
Being young, my sister told me to go to sleep, and I saw big piles. I thought it was rubbish. It wasn't. The next morning I woke up, and those were all of our neighbors. They were shot to death.
My brothers went into one line. My mother and I stood in another line. And then they called age, and I looked at my mother and I told her she belonged in another line. My mother left me and went into a different line. That was the last I saw of her. When I asked, several hours later, I asked, when would I see my mother? They pointed to the smoke and told me that my mother went to the gas chambers.
Lives were destroyed when Hitler came to power. Caught in the Nazi maelstrom of anti-Semitism, violence, and hatred, Jewish people and millions of others were forced to leave everything behind. It began with the destruction of their businesses, synagogues, and homes. Throughout Europe, the Nazis obliterated the very foundation of Jewish culture. Forced into ghettos, the people awaited what the Nazis called the final solution: the concentration camps, the death camps, transported by cattle car to be exterminated.
The ride in the boxcar is probably the hardest for me to speak about. You need to imagine a boxcar loaded with people that are standing shoulder to shoulder, leaning against each other. You need to imagine the mothers holding on to dead babies who died from lack of air. who got suffocated. My grandfather was one of the people that died in this compartment as we were taken to Auschwitz concentration camp. By the time we came into the camp, half of the people in our compartment were dead. How did I survive? I don't know. But I did.
Women, men, children. Their lives were brutally snuffed out. 6 million victims of mass murder are beyond our grasp of understanding. Churchill called it the most horrible crime ever committed in the whole history of the world. Out of the pain and tragedy of the past, Holocaust museums, memorials, and education centers are emerging in the present to remember and to teach the horrendous consequences of hatred, bigotry, and racism, so that such a calamity might never occur again to any people.
I think the lessons of the Holocaust are very important right now, very vital for this nation. And as the survivor generation passes from the scene, preserving those memories, whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in Skokie, becomes increasingly important. And it is vital that people who can't come to Washington have an opportunity to learn these lessons here in Skokie.
For most of the last 60 years, Skokie, Illinois, has had the largest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the world outside of Israel.
In Skokie, Illinois, a difficult test for a country that promises constitutional freedoms.
In 1977, a new generation of Nazis came to Skokie to intimidate those who endured Hitler's final solution. Survivors were stunned. Could it be happening here, even now? But they found their voice, took action, and together they said, never again. In the wake of the Nazi march, Holocaust survivors in the Chicago area founded the Holocaust Memorial Foundation of Illinois. One of the foundation's proudest achievements was leading Illinois' effort to pass the nation's first law requiring the teaching of Holocaust education to all public school children.
Reaching the children is really an insurance policy. You're ensuring that next generation and subsequent generations of stopping some of these horrible things that are still taking place in different countries like Rwanda. Racism is a worldwide thing. It's not indigenous to one culture, one people.
For some, hearing a survivor's story for the first time can be a profound experience.
Dear Mr. Harris, your story has changed my life forever. Prejudice and discrimination often seem insignificant, but meeting with you proved that they can lead to something really terrible. We have learned that we must speak out against cruelty and use our life to contribute positively to the world. Thank you for sharing your experience.
For more than 20 years, the foundation has provided educational programming to the public. This small museum is full of exhibits, artifacts, videos, and a research library.
From our current facility, a mere 3,000 square foot exhibition space, we have brought some 15,000 school children through our doors this year alone. Another 15,000 students have been reached through site visits by survivors who have spoken in their auditoriums and in their school classrooms.
Stanley Tigerman, the award-winning, world-renowned Chicago architect, has accepted the challenge to build a new Holocaust museum and has a bold new vision for the future.
This is a really important project. This is about history and a future, and the way we need as a culture to think about such things.
And the state of Illinois has endorsed the project by contributing a multi-million-dollar grant to support the new building on this piece of land, just west of the Edens Expressway in Skokie.
We're building a 50,000 square foot facility, including a 300-seat auditorium, a major permanent exhibit that tells the story before the Holocaust, during, and after the Holocaust. We're building a library for scholars and non-scholars alike so that they can study about the Holocaust. We have a children's exhibit to serve children under 12 for whom this may be very difficult subject matter, but to whom the values that are taught by the subject matter are quite important.
For many years, survivors like Lisa Derman have dreamed of building a new Holocaust museum and education center. But like so many others, Lisa passed away before that dream became a reality. These words, spoken shortly before her death in July 2002, resonate with us today.
We want to leave a legacy after we are gone to help educate generations of people that will come after us when we will be here no more, to teach them of the importance of speaking up. Democracy needs vigilance. We all must be vigilant, not to take our freedom for granted.
I believe we make a difference. And this is what sustains people like myself to continue doing what we're doing, because it is not a pleasant subject to talk about. You're opening up your heart, you're bleeding in front of people, and this is not something, quite frankly, I'd rather be out on a golf course than do that, okay? But I do it because I feel I'm touching somebody.
One day in the not-too-distant future, Holocaust survivors will no longer be with us. Yet the invaluable lessons they have struggled to understand and to pass on must endure. The Chicagoland area needs a museum and education center dedicated to preserving the legacy of survivors' testimony, communicating the lessons of the past to new generations, and carrying the torch of truth into the future. But we can't do it without you. Building a state-of-the-art facility to accomplish these goals takes an immense amount of planning and design work. Programs and exhibitions need to be developed to communicate to visitors in the most compelling way possible. And all of that takes a lot of money. Please join me in supporting the new Holocaust Museum and Education Center for Chicago, for our region, and for the nation. Only by fighting bigotry and hatred today can we help prevent the tragedies of tomorrow.
It's pretty powerful. Howard, what I want to do is start the process about explaining about the money. Because as Sam had said, when I met you and Sam at Cal Sutker's dedication at the Forest Preserve, and we talked about it, as you know, I was skeptical. I said, you kept on telling me this isn't going to cost the village a penny. And I said, I find that hard to believe. And I asked you to get me some information, which you did. And then I had our three primary staff members regarding this. Daniela Porterpillo, our finance director, who's also AV director tonight. Joe Wade, our village administrator, and our corporation counsel, Teresa Hoffman-Liston. And once we got all that information, they told me too, said, you know, Mayor, why are we doing this? It was right at budget time. We all wear 2 or 3 hats, our staff here. I told them, well, I don't think it's going to take that long. I can't believe it's not going to cost the village any money. And if it costs us any money, I don't think that this is something that the village of Morton Grove needs to get into right now. But if it does, and it truly is what it says, what you said it was, that it wasn't going to cost the village a penny, why not? Then I want to know why not. And through their diligence and your staff, I'm convinced that it truly doesn't. The trustees, I've talked to the trustees about it beforehand, let them know where we were going, because I didn't think at the time too, I didn't even let them know I was looking at this because I didn't think I was going to be bringing it to them. Once we got that done and the information to all the trustees and on the money issue, we've been trying to explain it. It's hard to get your hands around. I've talked to many residents, as I know some of the trustees, all the trustees here have. So it truly, truly does not cost the village a penny. The other thing that that I was advised by my staff is, you know, Mr. Mayor, we need to get our own opinions, somebody outside. And we did. We went and asked, we got legal opinion bound counsel. which was paid for by the Holocaust Museum, whether we approve this or not. So I think the village has done its due diligence. I'm convinced, but I would like you now, and I know Janet, who did an excellent job the other night on this subject, to broach that subject on how it truly affects, does it affect the village's finances in any shape or form?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was a good segue, and let's talk about the money. And just to get the chronology, because I know that some questions have been raised about dating of memoranda, etc. The Cal Sutker ceremony was October 26th. And you said to me, I don't think we've done this before. Get me the information and we'll take a look at it. So October 27th is the date of the Chapman and Cutler memo, because that's exactly the next day I called, because we're anxious to see if we can get this done. We did not meet, I don't think, with your staff, with Mr. Wade and the others, I think, until the middle of November. November 14th, I think, was the date I was told. That was the very first meeting on this topic. At this time, though, I'd like to set some context here. I'd like to introduce to you, for a very brief explanation, the former executive director of the Illinois Educational Facilities Authority, which was the state agency that no longer exists, but for decades, it was the agency that issued the kind of bonds that we're asking you to issue tonight. Tom Conley.
Mr. Mayor, trustees, thank you for having me tonight. Briefly, my name is Tom Conley. I'm the former executive director and legal counsel for the Illinois Educational Facilities Authority. During my 12 years of serving in that capacity, the authority issued over $4 billion worth of bonds for over 126 different issuances, had about 40 to 50 different institutions. This was all done without cost or risk to the authority or the state of Illinois. And this is the same type of bond issuance that the museum is asking you to issue. These are called revenue bonds because the bonds are payable solely from the revenues to be paid by the museum on the bonds. The bonds will not constitute the legal or moral obligation of the village, which means they do not show up on your financial statements other than perhaps in a footnote. They will be issued without cost to you. I know that another issue that was raised was, well, have other cities around Illinois done this? I can answer that in the affirmative, yes. I will tell you that during my tenure on the authority, we had a number of institutions that would come to us and would say to us, we have an opportunity to do a local issuer, and we would encourage them to do so because we felt that our role was to help these institutions in whatever way we could. If a local issuer could do it for less than we as a statewide issuer could, we would encourage them to do so and we would help them to the extent that we could. As a state agency, as an arm of the state, we had overhead expenses. They were minimal, but we did have charges. And so we would encourage institutions to go to local issuers when it was, when they could do it cheaper than we could. So for example, the city of Galesburg issued bonds for Knox College. I believe the city of Monmouth did the same thing for that school. And I believe there's a list that was prepared by Chapman and Cutler that lists about 22. There's some others as well. During my tenure, their institutions as varied as the I'm trying to remember them all. Illinois Mathematics High School did an issuance that's not on that list. So there are several that aren't even on that list. But it's a very, very common thing to do. And I believe that why the museum is here before you is that they can do it without additional costs or expense themselves. So I'm here to answer any questions that you may have as well regarding what this means. As I said, the museum is going to make you whole on all your costs. It will not affect your financial statements. It will not affect your risk in any manner, shape, or form. The only thing that you'll be doing is supporting an institution that's on your borders that everyone, I believe, in this room has to agree is a good thing to have. Any questions?
Any trustees have any questions?
I have one question, or maybe several later, I don't know. If we issue these bonds tonight to the museum, but then other organizations come to us and ask for similar bonds, and we turn them down, is that just because we're doing this now, is this setting any kind of precedent?
It's my belief that you have the discretion to issue bonds for whatever projects you want to. If you find this one to be appropriate, but others not to be appropriate, I believe you would have the discretion to say no if you wanted to.
Are there community groups or organizations that can come to us that would be inappropriate for a government to fund?
Religious, as Howard said. Yes, there are obviously a separation of church and state. For example, the authority that I was the head of, we had to be very careful as to what we funded. We issued bonds for Loyola University, for example, but none of our money could be used for their seminary. So we looked exactly how the money would be spent, and was spent in the appropriate fashion. So yeah, we looked at both the issuer and then what the proceeds of the bonds are to be used for. Yeah.
And is there any repercussion that a group can use if we denied them later?
I'm not aware of any. And again, it's your discretion, and it's up to you as the village leaders as to which ones do you wish to support, because you are supporting it.
Thank you.
Janet, Janet's our legal bond counsel on this. Did you want to maybe expound on that at all, Janet?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Is the sound working
Yeah.
okay? Okay. I'm Janet Hoffman. I'm a partner at Catton Muchin Rosenman. Our firm was hired as special counsel to the village to advise them in this. With respect to your question about the city's obligation, or the village's obligation to issue for other nonprofits who come and request, there's no statutory or constitutional provision which would require you to issue bonds for any other nonprofit. You're issuing these bonds under your home rule powers. You certainly have that discretion, but it is completely discretionary with respect to the village. Because there's no statutory or constitutional responsibility for you to issue these, a group who wishes you to issue bonds can ask you, but they can't force you to do it. Now, could they file suit against you? People can, anybody can file suit, but they won't have the ability to pursue that suit because there's no legal basis for the complaint.
Thank you.
Any other trustees? Trustee Sinensky?
Is it safe to say that LaSalle Bank would be holding the bond or guaranteeing the bond?
These particular bonds are structured as variable rate demand bonds. What that means is that there is a letter of credit issued by LaSalle Bank which will be drawn upon to pay all the interest and principal on the bonds, and if the bonds are tendered by the bondholders, to pay the repurchase price of the bonds. And then it is the foundation's obligation to repay the LaSalle Bank for any draws that are made under the letter of credit. So to the extent that the foundation makes principal and interest payments, those do not go directly to the bondholders. Those go to LaSalle Bank. If the foundation defaults on their payment obligations, the way the bond issue is structured is that there would be a draw on the letter of credit. The bondholders would be paid off in full, and then the responsibility of collecting from the foundation would be LaSalle Bank's responsibility. Not all revenue bond issues are structured this way, but it's certainly one option. It happens to be because the bonds will bear a short-term variable rate, typically the lowest cost of capital that would be available to a nonprofit. And so it's a favored way for them to issue debt, but you have to have a bank who's willing to take the credit risk. These bonds will be rated by a rating agency. I believe they're going to be rated by Standard & Poor's, and they will be rated based on LaSalle's bank letter of credit, because the bondholders are not taking the credit risk of the foundation. Only LaSalle Bank is taking the credit risk of the foundation. This particular structure was not one that you required, but it does help protect the name of Morton Grove because you have the confidence that the bondholders would be paid by a source of funds over and above the foundation's wherewithal to pay.
Thank you. That's very well stated. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Trustee Stackman?
Yeah. I'd like to state now, I think everybody is unanimous in the merit of this project and the necessity of doing this. You know, but my concern here is the issue of the issuance of the bonds and not the project per se. If there was by any chance a default, you're saying there would never be a taint on the village of Morton Grove for being the conduit of this. Not that we're responsible, but a taint on the bond, on the village of Morton Grove.
The rating agencies, which would be who evaluate the credit of the village, have very strict credit requirements, and when they rate your credit, they do not look at the payment history for revenue bonds, even if they weren't backed by a letter of credit. The credit markets make a distinction as to the source of payment. I don't know if the village has ever issued municipal revenue debt versus general obligation
I couldn't
debt.
answer that question.
But typically, for a village or a city, their general obligation debt would be the most highly rated basis that they have. Secondly, would be revenue debt from a municipal source. Say you had a water system or an electric system, you might pledge those revenues alone. Those are the credit ratings and how the credit markets look at the village. The revenue debt that you're issuing to benefit the museum is outside of that and would not be something that people would look
Never.
to. Never.
I'd like to add to that too. During my 12 years representing the authority, we were often called before the state legislature to explain what we did and how we did it. And in doing that, we would obtain letters from Moody's and Standard & Poor's to confirm to the legislative leaders who would be new to the situation that these bonds would have no effect whatsoever on the credit rating of the state of Illinois in any manner, shape, or form. And they, you know, if you wanted such a letter, they would provide that with you.
Yeah, and all the documentation we have does show that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
It will have no effect.
Okay, but the other question I have is, you know, the question of, we've never done this before. So by doing this is setting a precedent for the village of Morton Grove, that we would do it this time, if we do it, correct?
Well, anytime you do something
For the first time.
for the first time,
It is a precedent.
It alerts people that you've done it at least once.
Correct.
Trustee, is it
Stackman.
Stackman? I wasn't sure how you pronounce the double A. You know, the city of Chicago issues debt on behalf of O'Hare Airport, but those are revenue bonds on behalf of the airport. The city's credit is not affected by the credit of United Airlines, who tends to be one of the primary repayment. You know, if you think about it in that way, I think that you can see for the larger municipal corporations, they're often called upon to issue debt to benefit something where it's not the city's credit.
I understand. You said that there would be no cost to us. Is there a, you know, I don't know if I read it in here or was in passing conversation with somebody, that the village could recoup the administration time spent on this?
Absolutely. That's how my authority got paid its way. We were paid by the borrowers.
I mean, I haven't asked, but, you know, how many man-hours have we spent on this? If we were to, you know, is that how we have to do it? Find out how many man-hours, administrative man-hours we spent on it to recoup that time?
Well, that's between you and the museum, but you could either or just make an estimate. That's kind of what we did. We estimated what it was costing per issuance and then issued a statement which was paid by the institution, borrowers.
Okay.
The fact that we didn't use this bond this year, is that why we're so approachable? Is that exact? Could you address that for me a little bit?
Okay, if we segue, we're still talking about money, but now we're talking about why Morton Grove, perhaps?
Oh, yeah, basically.
On August 30th, Sam Harris and Mr. Hirschout and I met with the village leadership in Skokie, and we had broken ground in a ceremonial way on June 22nd with Commissioner Suffredin present and Governor Blagojevich and the Attorney General and a number of other officials. We did not, however, have the financing secured. Reference was made to LaSalle Bank. I'd like to ask just for a moment Naresh Pandey and Sabina Stevenson from LaSalle Bank just to rise. Naresh is the first vice president, is that right? I have the right title? First vice president LaSalle in the not-for-profit area who put together the financing package, joined by National City Bank and Fifth Third Bank. So it's actually a three-bank consortium. And in the late summer, maybe it was August, we got a strong indication that they were willing to do this. As Janet, your counsel, indicated, not all not-for-profits come to a government agency already having lined up a letter of credit. It's not mandatory in the statute, and we could have come to you without that, but we thought it would be much better to deal, for example, with the reputational question that you mentioned, is to be in a situation where no bondholder would ever lose because we have a bank standing behind the bonds. It also, frankly, gets a better interest rate. So when we had this arranged on a preliminary basis with the banks, we felt comfortable to meet on August 30th with the Village of Skokie. And because of their own financing activities, several of which are in play, the way it was explained to us, they asked us to consider alternatives. And in fact, I think Commissioner Suffredin was going to talk to us about the possibility of Cook County, which legally can issue bonds. As you know, there's a change of administration there. There's a lot going on. And on October 26th, I met the mayor at Mayor Creer at this groundbreaking ceremony. In fact, if I recall correctly, I was standing talking to Commissioner Suffredin. At the moment that Mr. Creer came up, I had never met Mayor Creer before. And we said we have this need, and then the rest of the things have flown from there. The law permits any home rule unit within a 10-mile radius to issue the bonds. And so, frankly, Morton Grove is a perfect candidate. I mean, you're so proximate, but you were the first people we spoke to after the Village of Skokie. And at this time, let's see, I thought, Mr. Rigoni, where are you? Oh, Al, would you just come up for a moment, please? Al Rigoni is the village manager of the Village of Skokie, who has worked with us for 4 or 5 years to try to put this project together. Has been, frankly, a godsend to us in dealing with the county government, the forest preserve, with the village, with IDOT. This was a complex matter. And I'd just like to have him address briefly for you so you can, excuse me, to use the metaphor, the horse's mouth.
Good evening, everybody. As Howard mentioned, we've been ardent supporters and, in fact, partners in this project, and talk about man hours, the hours that we spent acquiring the land, negotiating the lease, dealing with Illinois Department of Transportation, Cook County Highway Department, Cook County Forest Preserve, which has given us a license for the parking lot, which will be built there, reprioritizing our capital improvement budget so that we could redo Woods Drive with a signal at each end. And so the village is an ardent supporter of this project, and we do view ourselves as partners. As Howard mentioned, when they came to talk with us about this, we had no concerns about the financing risk or any such things. We're familiar with these types of issuances, but, and I could begin to outline them, the village has just a host of projects undergoing, including, and not the least of which, is the 23-acre Illinois Science and Technology Park, the former Pfizer property. We have $12 million in debt for that tax increment financing district